Hey guys, up until now we haven't been able to view much output from our program except for doing a message box and seeing a variable or two or an item in the object. Today we want to stop doing that. Let's make a GUI, but before we get into that, I did notice one or two things that weren't quite right with that last project. In that text array, we're looping the entire thing, right? Each line is going through one by one. Now, what's going on here that I noticed is we are always going to run into this null and continue when it doesn't match here. We're never going to get into this break area so that we skip this information. So this actually has to come in first, because remember how that continue works. Every time it doesn't have a perfect match, it's going to skip over. We're never going to see this other information part. So let's move that up so that it has a chance to hit that first. Oh, actually, oh, okay, that's correct. That's fine. Okay. The only problem is that part. Okay, now it should be good because it wouldn't grab the parentheses itself. That's part of the pattern. Regex. The other thing was we're looping this, and every time we want to insert into the server array, look what we're using here, A index. That isn't quite right because A index is going to be the corresponding line number. So if we, well, I don't know if I can show us. Well, I think I can. We need here is our, there you are. Let's borrow that, and let's just view that server array. Okay, so what you see here is each line here, it's not ordered correctly. This should be 1, this should be 2, this should be 3. This is not quite right because it's going through, it's finding nothing correct here, so number 1 is totally gone when we try to insert it into the next array. This as well here, any blank lines, they're all going to be skipped, and we're just inserting different A index numbers into the server array. I hope that makes sense. What we're going to use instead is X instead of A index. We need A index here because we still want to read every single line, but let's use X as, we'll start it at 0, and every time there is not a break and not a continue, then we'll just say X++. Now if we run it, we get it in order because we're not inserting into the array with an element label thing as A index, which could be, being broken or continued through. We're using X, that's always going to increment by 1 when we have a correct pattern. So that's the only two things that were a little bit not quite right with our script that I wanted to go over. But let's go ahead and head into making a GUI for this. And in fact, before I forget, let's just comment that out so we don't see message box anymore. I typically do my GUIs as a function, or actually a subroutine. I forget if I label them FN or subroutine. I guess they're kind of a subroutine. I usually set them to global. That's just a useful thing so that they can be edited elsewhere. Okay. Now, I do have this already made a little bit. Maybe we'll look at the documentation. Yeah. This should be the first thing, I think. Okay. So with a GUI, you use this command GUI add, and there's let's look at the documentation here. you can add a lot of different things to your GUI. You can add a list view is what we'll be doing today, a text box, a button, checkboxes, radio buttons, drop-down lists. There's a lot of different things here. Progress bars are pretty fun as well. But let's just keep it simple today. We're going to do a button and a list view. A list view, I don't think they have a picture here. We'll see it soon enough. But GUIs are not going to be something that I can cover in their entirety here. Just a few things to get you started, otherwise you're going to have to look for the kind of GUI controls that you want. Like look how many options there are here just for a list view. You can make it unsortable, you can make it so users can't select more than one row at a time. You can have a grid, I like that. Okay, so let's go into the code, and what we're doing is we're saying GUI add a button, and I think you can kind of get an idea from here how it works, but it's not too clear. One thing is I want to point out, you see how this options has a comma and the comma there to keep it in the options? Well, look here, I'm doing a lot of different options, but I don't have a comma in between every single one. Don't get into a mistake like that. What was that? Okay. Now when you add a button, doing a G here makes it a label that it goes to when you press that button. So when we do this button, we need a label. And the way labels work is they're kind of mentioned like this. I've got the word button is highlighted there, but it shouldn't be. You can set a label like this. And now when we click that button in the GUI, it'll send us here. We'll go through until we hit a return or an exit app or something else. Now let's go ahead, and the next thing we're going to be adding is a list view. Actually, why don't we see if this runs? Oh no, it's not quite right. Target label does not exist for this double click. When we don't need this, I'll save it for later. I'll just say turn like that so we can run it. Okay. That's not right. What I want to show you is this should all be good now. Oh yeah, I want to get rid of this so we don't have to deal with him anymore. Okay, so here's what our GUI kind of looks like. A list view is this part. It's basically like kind of an Excel kind of grid layout thing. I don't know, maybe the documentation can describe it a little better. It is a list view is the most elaborate control, one of the most elaborate controls. It's a tabular view of rows and columns. Okay, that sounds better. So what I'm thinking here is any trouble machines, we want them to appear in this list, and the free disk space percentage as well in there. So the way that we can do that, let's go over to our GUI creation area. All these options are how we want it to appear. Remember when we were talking about X and Y, where X is this row direction and Y is this direction? I'm saying X2, so not very far this way, and Y70 down here. So that's why it's starting X is like barely 2 pixels and then down 70 pixels. And then the rest of this is the width and the height. It looks like I've got some pretty exact numbers in there so that we get it nice and flush. You don't have to do that. What I have, okay, let's just go through the rest of this grid. I'm selecting the option I want a grid so that we can see it. If not, it'll look more like this with no grid. So I always do grid almost. Redraw, that is there for just redrawing the GUI. It's not really needed. Double click. Okay, so if there were some items in this list, we could double click them, and when we double click them, they'll go to this area, or the Waldo script will jump to this area. In other words, I'm not doing anything there. I don't think we have time to mess around with double clicking, but I just wanted to mention that it is an option. And then a variable. You specify the word v and then the variable name. Now we'll need this variable name later when we're adding to this list view. And then the last option is just the columns, and I think you separate those with these vertical bars. I don't even know if that one's necessary. Yeah, it doesn't look like it is. But read the documentation. Maybe it is required for something else that I'm forgetting offhand. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's start putting some information in there. I didn't actually look at any. Okay. So the way it kind of works with list views is you use a command lv_add. So let's loop through here, and instead of doing a message box, we're going to do lv_add. And the first option, well, let me see how well this lv_add is not giving me any tips really. Oh, there we go. So options go in the first area, and for that you can, by default, list views are a lot of times used as a checklist, or you can have a checkbox on it, or icons. I haven't messed too much with that, so I usually just use a blank option or just a blank two quotes. Okay, so column 1 is going to be the server name, so we can say server_array. And we are going to use a index here because this loop is going through the entire server list, which is smaller and it doesn't have those blank areas. If this is not making sense, go ahead and make sure you've watched the previous lesson where we kind of set this up. Okay. And then the second one was the free space, free disk space. So we'll go like this, and I want to just add a % because we lost that % when we were doing the regular expression. So let's run that and see if it works. No. Oh, you know why it's not working? Our script is being stopped right after it builds the GUI. So let's remove that return. When the return is encountered, your script goes into kind of a holding pattern as far as executing new code. That is, returns not in a function. A return in a function will, of course, spit that result back out to the main area. So that's why it's good to kind of keep your functions and your main area separated. Okay. Okay, I think that should be good now. This button update, actually, we can have that, can't we? We can do like this, and when we press this button, it's going to jump down to here. So let's try that. Oh, something didn't quite work right. You know, I think what happened is we got to this exit app. In fact, let's get rid of this exit app for now, and we can learn about something else. When your GUI closes, when someone presses this X button up here, it's going to jump to this GUI close area, and now we just want to close the app. So that is almost always what I do when the GUI closes. You know, we're done with the program. We don't want it running anymore. By default, it's not going to shut the whole script down, so you have to tell it exit app. Now, the only instance you probably wouldn't do that is if you want something running in the background, or you have multiple GUIs. We'll get to that in a moment. In fact, let's see. Did we already make our changes? That's not quite working right. But when you have multiple GUIs, it's going to look a little different. Do I have an example of that nearby? Yeah, I do. When you have multiple GUIs, they each need to have a name. And I am more and more just immediately doing a GUI. That way I don't have a huge headache later where I have to add all this to the script later. And one thing you're going to want to do when you create GUIs that aren't the default, you're going to want to set one to the default. In this case, I'm calling this selection. Let's just maybe call it main. I think with this, yeah, there you go. That's a cool thing this text editor has. It's elsewhere as well, I'm sure. Okay. That should be better. Let's see if it works. No, it's still not quite. Something's not. Button update should be sending us here. I'm not sure why we're not getting anything. I'm gonna move my prep. My only preparation is gonna be creating the GUI. Everything else is gonna be after that. So I'm not quite sure what's going on wrong there. Let's try it again here. Where is it? Oh yeah. Okay, there we go. So we've got the one server that is a problem. Actually, you know, I meant before I started this to add a bunch more so that we would have more than just one. Actually, I wanted to keep functions separated, didn't I? Let's see. Oh, the other thing is, I think it's LV column modifier or LV. There's a lot of different options for list view. LV modify column lets you modify how big these columns are. So you saw when we ran our update, it was kind of cutting this in half because, well, let's just run it from the beginning. When we hit update, we couldn't see the entire server name because by default it was just created to fit the label. So what you can do is you can do modify column, and then you can either say column to integer, sorting. I forget. I can't quite remember how that is, but you can specify. Okay, here we go. You can specify the number of pixels, how big it should be. But for me, most of the times, just doing LV modify column is enough that it will fit. So we'll try that real quick. And actually, we'll just, instead of doing that a bunch of times in the loop, we'll just do it at the very end. Okay, so now the entire server name fits. This one doesn't quite fit because the 3% is a lot smaller than the free disk space. So yeah, it does. This method doesn't work perfectly for everything right off the bat. But what you could probably do is modify column to, might be 2 or it might be 1, and let's just say 50. Let's try that. 50 pixels doesn't look like enough. We could just try 300. Okay, now it's huge. So that's kind of how that works. Of course, read the documentation if you run into something or you're wanting to do a special kind of case. Now we can double click it, but it doesn't. Our double click short basically does nothing. It just returns. And since we're in a function, it just spits back out to the main area. Nothing. Okay, the only other thing I wanted to mention for this lesson is timers. Timers are awesome. Timers let you have your script do something every X amount of milliseconds. So let's go ahead and make a timer in our prep area that says to check or do our main program every 1 minute or so. So set timer, the label, which is going to be button, update, and the period is, you can specify a negative period to only do the update or only do the timer once. Otherwise, most often you're going to be using a timer to do something on a periodic basis. For example, maybe every 10 seconds in your game something happens, like you heal a little bit or something like that. So that would be what you would want a reoccurring timer for. But you can also set timers to on or off. So if you want to have your script in other places, like in your game, say, well, you can't heal all the time, so turn the timer off sometimes. In this case, let's just say every 1,000 milliseconds would be 1 minute, so maybe we'll do 6,000. We'll just do let's just do a little search here. 1 minute in seconds. So yeah, 6,000. So every 1 minute do our program. And in our imaginary world, we'll just pretend that this file gets replaced every so often with by another tool that's saying all these new servers appeared, or these new servers are having some situation. And actually, let's just drop this down to every 1,000 seconds. But let's just see what happens. So if we wait, well, I thought it would be going by now every 1 second, I thought. That is odd. Huh. Wonder what's not quite working right with our timer. No, I don't have any timers there. Update button, it should be going to here right now. I believe the option to clear the list view, LV delete row number. Okay, since we don't want our program just spitting new servers into that GUI constantly, it would eventually get impossible to look at. Let's go ahead, and when the program runs, where is it? When the program, right before it updates with all the new servers, let's do LV delete. We could loop through the entire list and say delete everything, but if you just do 0 input options, it'll delete the whole thing. But we still need to figure out why this update button isn't working. Let me look at the documentation here for set timer. Label, period, should be working, I thought. Let's go ahead and run that. Still not quite right. Let me just see if I have any existing scripts with timers. No, none of these do. Oh, this one has a lot, I know. Check files, -1. Yeah, this should be working. I'm gonna have it. Maybe this return is causing a problem? I don't know why that would be the case, though. Huh. Well, maybe what's happening is it's having trouble understanding 2 timers pointing at the same thing. So I'll just try update, or maybe that dash is maybe not quite compatible. Build GUI. I'm honestly not sure why it's having this much trouble. Update just runs a normal program. Don't quite know offhand what's going on there. Maybe what we can do is instead we will run a every imagine this is 2 minutes. Every 2 minutes tell the user message box, you have some servers that need attention. See if that works any better. So that's kind of a timer working. I don't know why we're having trouble jumping down into this area. The other thing I want to just mention well, maybe we'll get to that later. I think that's going to be it for now. My name is Chunji. Thank you guys for showing up and attending. I am doing a different Zoom level because some of the feedback I got, and I thought it maybe is more useful so you don't have to watch it in full screen all the time. Anyways, I'll see you guys around. Thanks so much.